Tired of big tech clashing with your Catholic values? Feday Chat is now live on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. It's private, encrypted, and built by Catholics for Catholics, with features like parental controls and more. Connect securely with family, friends, and groups. Download Feday Chat at feday.email. Technology without compromise.
Yesterday, we got news from Rome of the first major appointment by Pope Leo to the Roman Curia. And for people who were wondering what kind of direction we were going to get from the Pope under this new papacy, whether it would be a clean break from Francis or a continuation of what he had done or something in between, the answer is we don't know, because his new appointment is universally being accepted as non-controversial and, frankly, boring. Boring is probably good for some of these appointments. But if you want to know what we're in for the next 10 years, 20 years, maybe more, unlikely more, but maybe more, then this is, well, you'll still have to wait and see. But here is the news from Dion Montagna. She posted this late yesterday, just in. In his first major curial appointment, Pope Leo XIV has named Archbishop Filippo Ioannon of the Carmelites as the new prefect of the dicastery for bishops and president of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America. He assumes office on October 15th. Not much is known about him. She goes on to say that he's an Italian Carmelite and canonist, has served until now as prefect for the dicastery for legislative texts. Now, for many of you, you may not have known that there was a dicastery for legislative texts. Like I said, fairly boring pick. He also confirmed a couple of assistants for him. Well, with today's appointment, Pope Leo has now filled the post he held until his election on May 8th, 2025. This is being described as a boring pick because not much is known about him. He's never found himself involved in controversy, that sort of thing. For those who are wondering what, if there's anything to read from this, probably not, honestly. The only thing that I noted is this is Pope Leo's own post. And when he was appointed there, nobody had really heard about then Cardinal Robert Prevost. So a boring pick doesn't necessarily mean inconsequential either. Keep in mind, this is the new prefect for the dicastery of bishops. He will be in charge of keeping tabs on what the various bishops are doing. If there's ever an investigation into the bishops, he will be the one leading it. Think of future Bishop Strickland kind of cases. And of course, most importantly, helping with the formation of and selection of new bishops. That is a key role. And so a non-controversial pick, a boring pick, may be good or it might not be. We shall see. Keeping in mind, Pope Leo has made some extraordinarily questionable decisions when it comes to appointing new bishops for vacant dioceses. And he was, before he was the Pope, that had that office himself under Pope Francis. So we'll see. We'll see how things go on this. Now, I'm going to go here to the first main story. So Cardinal Cupich has decided to issue some responses to the to Bishop Paparocchi and Bishop Cordileone and the other half dozen bishops who have called him out for giving honors to Senator Richard Durbin. See, Senator Durbin has been a lifelong, enthusiastic defender of the sacrifice of the most vulnerable to Moloch on either ends of life. That has been his MO. He is, after all, not only a Democrat, but a lifelong career Democrat. And as such, in the United States today, if you are anywhere on the political left, you have to sign on to that evil issue. When you have to basically endorse that party's growing evil on that issue. Going so far as to say no limits. 2 hours before you're supposed to, to deliver, well, how about this? How about if you want to change your mind at the last minute, we want to protect your choice. That's the party's stance. I've heard them say that on the floor of the U.S. Senate. And so the Pillar reports under this headline, after statement from Paparocchi, Cardinal Cupich defends award for Durbin. Cupich said he was trying to engage in dialogue with Durbin. Now, most importantly here, he also says he's basically following the Vatican's directives on this. That's eye-opening. After all, Vatican has said, at least under Ratzinger, when he was both Pope and before that, when he was working for John Paul II, you're not supposed to do these kinds of things. The only dialogue you're supposed to have is a call to repentance and to help clear the air with these politicians on what the church actually teaches and the consequences of what the church teaches if you choose not to follow those teachings. That's it. Not, oh, well, we heard your side of the story and you heard the church's side and both are equal, so you can now go receive communion. No, that's not what the church has said. The church has the power of binding and loosing. You have the duty to submit when it comes to very basic moral teachings. Here's the details from this article. Quote, after criticism from a fellow Illinois bishop, Chicago Cardinal Blaise Cupich doubled down on his archdiocese's decision to honor Senator Dick Durbin, a longtime supporter of legal protection for that evil sacrifice. In a September 22nd statement, the Cardinal said his decision to confer an award on Durbin is in line with Vatican guidance on the need for dialogue with the politicians who oppose the church's teaching on the subject. He acknowledged criticism of the recent announcement that Durbin will be given a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Archdiocese of Chicago's Office of Human Dignity and Solidarity in November. In particular, he seemed to respond to comments Friday from Bishop Thomas Paprocki of Springfield. He defended the Archdiocese's decision to grant the award, which will be bestowed at a November 3rd fundraiser for the Archdiocesan Immigration Ministry. Senator Durbin informed me some years ago that he's taken up residence in Chicago, registered in a parish of the Archdiocese, and considered me to be his bishop, Cupich said. Considered me to be his bishop. Now, that's an interesting phrasing, by the way. If he has a residence there, then he is his bishop. If that's his primary residence, and the key word is primary, if that's not where his primary residence is, then strictly speaking, Cupich is only his bishop when he's in Chicago. But otherwise, his actual bishop is Paprocki, who has been telling him no communion for 21 years. Accordingly, I have remained faithful to the May 2021 instructions of the then Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, advising bishops to reach out and to engage in dialogue with Catholic politicians within their jurisdictions as a means of understanding the nature of their positions and their comprehension of Catholic teaching. And it goes on like that. It notes here that Paprocki, as I've pointed out multiple times this week while talking about this, Paprocki points out that the award appears to violate Chicago's own archdiocesan policy, which prohibits awards or honors to individuals or organizations whose public position is opposition to the fundamental moral principles of the Catholic Church. To explain the policy, the Archdiocesan Policy Manual notes that, quote, many organizations and presenters that, quote, do good work in some areas are misguided in others, particularly in the areas of human life and sexuality. In the past, some honorees, speakers, or organizations presented at gatherings for Catholic organizations have publicly advocated viewpoints that are in opposition to the faith, causing confusion and division within the church. And as you might expect, the Archdiocesan Policy says you can't give awards to those kinds of people or organizations because it cause scandal. Now, I'll say again what I've said here multiple times on this topic. Scandal is the second thing you need to worry about. The first is Senator Durbin's soul. The man is 80 years old, which means he's got a lot less time left to worry about it than most people watching this. He needs to make his peace with God and be prepared for his judgment, which may come in 20 years, could come in a couple of days. We don't know. Only God knows that schedule. But Senator Durbin needs to take this seriously. But the problem is many progressive Catholics either just are functionally walking around as atheists, same with a lot of conservative Catholics, to be fair, or they believe the church essentially doesn't know what it's talking about on rather basic issues of morality. And when you go there, you destroy the church's authority to teach. If you don't believe the church's authority on that issue, then you don't think the church's authority on any fundamental moral issue. Now, another story broke yesterday, and this one is an interesting one, to say the least, and I would be remiss if I didn't give you this update. We go here to, well, I reported earlier in the week, and it's my news video for today, if you're not familiar with the issue, is on the issue of a bishop from Monterey who is becoming a new bishop in Austin. And he he had like a day left as the Bishop of Monterey when he issued, as he was walking out the door, a document ending the Latin Mass in Monterey, California. And on his first day in Austin, Texas, well, you get this. Go to Rate Caeli. Headline, new TLM suppression. Diocese of Austin acts as scheduled Latin Mass at Texas A&M University. See, students were going to have a Latin Mass at Texas A&M. And for such a thing, they need to get permission from the diocese. Sounds like they had it. But apparently, not good enough for the new Bishop of Austin, who could have just let this go. But he wanted to make a good impression on people to know there's a new sheriff in town. And he is going to actually make sure that we don't have any of this rigid clericalism in his diocese and that everybody toes the line. From the article, quote, news sent by our friends at Texas A&M in College Station. Quote, and here's their press release. In a stunning intervention, the Diocese of Austin has forced the cancellation of a scheduled traditional Latin Mass at Texas A&M University, silencing one of the most vibrant and growing expressions of Catholic faith among young people in America. The Mass was to be celebrated by a chaplain traveling from the Diocese of Victoria. On the evening before the liturgy, this priest was told by his Victoria bishop that he had received a directive from the chancellor of the Diocese of Austin, expressly forbidding him from traveling to College Station, meaning the priest can't even go to Texas A&M. This came after the pastor of St. Mary's Catholic Center, Father Will Stratton, reported the Latin Mass to the Diocese of Austin. In other words, a local priest reported the Latin Mass. This action contradicts the Catholic Church's 2,000-year liturgical continuity and undermines the principles of Summorum Pontificum, where Pope Benedict XVI reaffirmed the traditional Latin Mass, saying what earlier generations held as sacred remains sacred. It cannot be all of a sudden entirely forbidden or even considered harmful. Even worse, this action directly contradicts the two written approvals given by the Vatican's president of the Pontifical Commission, Ecclesia Dei to Juventum International. I'm going to pause here. I don't know why in their defense they're going to Summorum Pontificum and the Ecclesia Dei Afflicta documents. Those were essentially rescinded by Pope Francis. They have no binding authority. Yes, it undermines a phrase we all like to quote from Benedict XVI and Summorum Pontificum, but the law document in the church, an unjust tyrannical law, meaning no law at all, is Traditionis Custodes. Let's keep going. Texas A&M is home to one of the largest Catholic student centers in the United States. St. Mary's Catholic Center should be a place where the richness and diversity of Catholic liturgical life are celebrated. Instead, students are told there is no place for the same Mass which formed countless of their favorite saints, nourished the faith of generations of their ancestors, and remains deeply meaningful to ever more Catholics around the world. This is not just about one Mass, it's about the right of all young Catholics worldwide to access the fullness of their own beliefs, says Nick Cardinal, president of Juventutum Texas A&M. At a time when so many young people are leaving the church, and at the time countless more are being attracted to the TLM, it is tragic that students who long for reverence and continuity with the past are being discriminated against. The Latin Mass is not a rebellion. It is a Mass of our ancestors, a treasure of the universal church, and is currently the most productive source of vocations and conversions. To tyrannically restrict our right to it is to close the door on the very future of the church and on the impact it has in the world. End quote. Well, I'm going to give you a news flash, Mr. Cardone, and I mean this with all sincere respect. The powers that be in Rome have told us that the Mass that fed the saints, that formed the vast majority of the saints of the Western Church, is not compatible with the ecclesiology of the Church after Vatican II. The ecclesiology of the Church, meaning the theology of the Church itself, what its relationship to God is, what the relationship of the Church to man is, what the relationship of the Church to society is, and what the relationship between man and God is. They changed that at Vatican II, according to all of the authorities in the Church, hence why the traditional Mass not only needs to be suppressed, but phased out entirely. They've said that repeatedly. They call it the new synodal church, not a phrase any radical traditionalist, blogger, or podcaster came up with. It was said by Cardinal Arthur Roach and echoed by Cardinal Hollerich, one of the guys running the Synod on Synodality. That's why. What they want you to have instead is, your ordinary form Mass. It may be in Latin if you're lucky, or at least maybe offer with a vague sense of respect. But in general, The Latin Mass is not acceptable in the new synodal church. This is why your new bishop, appointed by the Pope to your diocese, day one suppressed your Mass. Now, Nick Cavazos, who is definitely sort of a Gen Z YouTube, Catholic commentator, worth following if you can find him on YouTube and TikTok and other places. He has a good alternative for you, but you'll have to leave some of the propaganda behind. And I say propaganda meaning if you've been told your whole life that the SSPX are in schism and evil, you've been lied to. They are an alternative. The Vatican has consistently said they're an alternative. Bishop Schneider has said you can go to Mass with the SSPX just fine and give money to their missions and everything else. That their issues with Rome are an internal family matter that needs to be worked out between the authorities of the SSPX and the hierarchy of the church. Benedict XVI said the same thing. Even Pope Francis was friendly to the SSPX. Here's what Nick Cavazos has to tell you. Attention, traditional Catholics in Austin and Dripping Springs. With our new bishop likely going to cancel the TLM at St. Martin's, that's the option for the TLM in Austin, we need to look for realistic options for the future. In October of 2026, the SSPX is opening a new church near us. Below is a photo of what the new SSPX church in Schertz, Texas, I hope I'm saying that right, will look like. Very traditional Spanish mission style, very cool. It will have a beautiful hand-carved high altar from Ecuador, 2 beautiful side altars, and a beautiful staircase pulpit. It will have old-school wooden confessionals, beautiful stained glass, and seat 450 people. It will have a large 100-person choir loft. It will also have a large parish hall. In the future, the SSPX will make this a priory, where daily Mass will be said, as well as a full traditional Catholic school with many priests and sisters. I was told that this parish is number 9 on the list for places to be made a priory. However, I think it's now closer, considering that the SXPS just put a priory in Louisiana. I would encourage you all to consider going and donating to the cause. This would finally be a permanent home for the TLM in Central Texas. TLM exclusive, solid preaching and catechesis, great moral advice in the confessional. If you have any questions about the new church or even the SSPX, meaning new parish, feel free to send me a private message, etc., etc., etc. That is an option for those of you, even if it means a drive, and should be considered as an option. Now, some people will have a hard time with that because they've endured a generation of propaganda about the SSPX. I don't know if the FSSP have a presence in that part of Texas or not. In my mind, they're also a good alternative to your community, your diocesan Latin Mass getting crushed by a bishop who is just like the newer bishops who were put in at the end of Francis's papacy and early in Leo's papacy. If you notice this trend, Charlotte, Detroit, now Austin, you've got these bishops who came in, and one of the first things they did was crush the traditional Mass. And people started asking good questions like, why? Why would he do this? And it looks like they think they'll get away with it. That's why. Or they've got support in Rome, either from the dicastery for the liturgy under Cardinal Arthur Roche or from the Pope himself. Time will tell. Time will reveal the answer to that. It is inevitable. Finally, we have this interesting piece of news. There are some studies that have been done on seminarians in the aftermath of the McCarrick problems in 2004, 2005. You know the story, broke in Boston first, and then all over the Western world, we heard horror stories of priests doing unspeakable evil things to young people, typically teenage males, but young people in general. And even worse than that was the fact that bishops often knew about it and hid the details themselves, hid the priest away, sometimes trading priests between dioceses like they were members of sports teams. And generally a culture of corruption and hiding things away, going all the way up to Rome. In 2018, when Archbishop Vigano issued his testimony against Francis, he basically said that the Vatican knew about all of this stuff, including Ted McCarrick, like the kingpin of this problem. One of the things they did in the aftermath of this was the USCCB required that seminarians receive psychological evaluation before they could even become a seminarian, because you want to know if the young men you're teaching to be priests and are going to be entrusting with the future of the church are actually fit to be priests in the first place. A laudable thing an unfortunate tragedy they had to do it, but laudable as a step. There were some steps they should have taken, though, like kicking all men with James Martin type inclinations out of the priesthood and stop allowing such men into the seminary. And some dioceses did the latter on that, by the way. For instance, in Portland, Oregon, if you have those inclinations, good luck getting into seminary. You should applaud the bishops, both Sample and his predecessor, who implemented that change. But we have some interesting new data here, and I think it's worth going over. This came from UCA News. The headline, New Study Finds Gaps in Assessing Priesthood Candidates. The 171-page report is the fruit of a larger project process of the McGrath Institute, which included a formation summit. Now, there's some things here that I consider kind of red flags because they use very clinical language. And you can use the clinical language they're doing to show that they're screening men out who are too orthodox under the terminology of neuroses, like psychological neuroses. And I say that because there's one of the things that happened in the aftermath of the McCarrick problem was that you would have priests who were very conservative, taught actual Catholicism. Yes, even if they offer the new mass for those of you who think that that's incompatible. There are plenty of examples of priests like that. And what they would end up doing is they would teach from the ambo or tell parishioners unequivocally Catholic things on hot button issues. And then somebody would get offended and report them to their bishop. And instead of the bishop putting that layperson in their place, would often cancel the priest and offer them a deal with the devil. Either you go into silence and essentially leave the priesthood, or we send you to a psychological health center, like a hospital, where they put the men with McCarrick inclinations to try to rehabilitate them, thus earning that priest the informal accusation of having been like that himself. That was a favorite tactic in the broader Chicago area. There are plenty of these. I believe one of the hospitals called St. Leo's that they do this to men at, thus making it so that priest can never either have ministry again, or if he does, it's like prison ministry. He can never work with families again. So we go to the article, keeping all that in mind. The project was initiated in 2024 by Father Thomas Berg, a visiting professor of the practice at the McGrath Institute, whose research and writings spanned moral theology, bioethics, the McCarrick crises, and seminary formation. The report data represents results from 5 surveys, which polled U.S. diocesan bishops, diocesan vocations directors, seminary rectors, seminary forementors, and spiritual directors, and mental health professionals who work with seminaries. Response rates for each group varied, with just over half, 53%, of the nation's Catholic bishops, 1/3, 33% of diocesan vocation directors, and 59% of seminary rectors participating, along with 111 seminary forementors and spiritual directors and 59 mental health professionals. I'm going to pause here, and I don't talk about my own credentials much, but I have a PhD. I went through a social science program to get a PhD, and I wrote a doctoral dissertation on Catholic social teaching. That's not what's important here. In my doctoral studies, I was forced basically to take qualitative and quantitative research methods courses. Quantitative methods are things like surveys, how surveys work, how polls work, and things. And while a lot of people express their skepticism at polls, I don't generally until I look at the numbers on how many people they surveyed, their methods. And then I'll express skepticism. For example, if you ever read a political poll, just because if they actually ask 2,000 people in the U.S., it's actually scientifically a pretty good poll, but you should dig deeper and find out who they asked. And you start looking at how the partisan inclinations of the people they asked, and then you'll find how skewed things are. It should line up with generally the registration data of the country, give or take. And therein lies kind of my concern with this data, because they got what sounds like at first pretty good turnout, right? 53% of the nation's bishops. Well, that's like a couple hundred people, maybe. 1/3 of diocesan vocations directors, so 100 people, and 59% of seminary rectors, along with 111 seminary forementors. And so you start getting into a question of what's called the margin of error on this. The plus or minus percentage for dictating whether this is actually good or not. So keep that in mind. But I still think you'll find this data interesting nonetheless, because you're asking a small pool of people and you got a okay amount of people responding. For this kind of survey, 53% is actually what a lot of people who do surveys of small groups would like to get back when it comes to the bishops. But the diocesan vocations directors is a little small, though the seminary rectors are pretty nice. 59%, it's pretty good. The majority of bishops, 90%, and vocations directors, 84%, who participated in the study said they were satisfied with the formation programs at their seminaries. And 91 to 96% of the two groups indicated they hold in-depth meetings with seminaries at least once a year or more often to discuss candidates. Both groups were also especially likely to have great confidence in how the seminaries cultivate seminarians' openness to growing spirituality, 55 to 59% very confident, and regular engagement in self-reflection. But the report found these three areas where it said both bishops and vocations directors were least likely to express great confidence in their seminaries. Just 19 to 21% were very confident in their formation of seminarians, quote, healthy management of one's neuroses or minor pathologies. What does that mean? Healthy living with medical concerns or physical limitations. So if someone's got some sort of physical handicap of some kind and they're in seminary, or dealing with learning disabilities, 16 to 17%. So this is low confidence among the bishops on those issues. But I'm most curious about healthy management of one neuroses or minor pathologies, because they have consistently called being conservative a neuroses or a pathology. That is literally the language they tell young men when they start having the talk with them. If they're in seminary and they catch them doing things like praying a preconciliar breviary, praying the rosary too much, being too rigid in the kind of questions they ask in the moral theology classes, or being known to just be too rigid on morality in general, not being synodal enough. And I got that testimony from numerous seminarians who have told me this, from men who had to go get ordained through some unorthodox means because they were drummed out of seminary, because they prayed an old breviary and they prayed the rosary and they believed in fasting and abstinence and things. That's certainly not the problem in every seminary, but it's a problem in more than you'd think. You're too conservative. They won't let you in. It's amazing that the seminary classes they're graduating these days are skewing heavily towards conservative priests. Maybe God just overwhelmed their system with their only good candidates to actually become priests being men who are actually Catholic. But it does look like a concern. And I'm taking this just in the rhetoric I've heard them use to describe seminarians. I've heard Pope Francis refer to seminarians being worried about future seminarians as having a pathology of rigidity and clericalist attitudes. And only 1 in 5 of the bishops are very confident in the formation of seminaries' healthy management of it. Rectors, formators, and mental health professionals are also shared the bishops' and vocation directors' confidence in seminaries' ability to nurture spiritual openness. What does that mean? And regular self-reflection. What does spiritual openness mean? Now, if that means being open to spiritual direction, you have a good spiritual director and you are open to what they tell you to do to make yourself a better seminarian and thus a better priest, fine. But in the new synodal church, spiritual openness sounds awfully lot like challenging your basic assumptions and being open to other viewpoints in a spirit of dialogue and ecumenical kumbaya. In addition, 32 to 43% of these survey groups said they were confident of seminaries' ability to enable seminarians to form healthy relationships with others and to seek treatment for mental health issues such as depression or anxiety. And that is a red flag. Less than 1/2 of the bishops, or of 1/2 of anybody surveyed, said that their seminarians had the resources and the ability to seek health on this. And that is key, because if you do not want any more priests making headlines for all the wrong reasons, you need to nail this. At least this is part of it. Now, the problem is, if you want to nail depression, anxiety, part of it is helping them to grow deeper in their faith. in the actual Catholic faith. But the three groups who are most likely to have regular day-to-day interactions with seminarians were least likely to be confident of how seminaries help those in formation to, quote, manage neuroses or minor pathologies, 1 in 5 at best, growing an understanding with the survey termed their, quote, their inclinations of the flesh. Why is that a question? Growing an understanding with the survey termed about, who they're attracted to. Why is that even a question? You're supposed to screen the men out to make sure they're not men like James Martin, to prevent that problem from growing and getting worse. Because it's the men like James Martin who become like men like Ted McCarrick. Not in every case, certainly. I'll be the first to admit it. Not in every case, but enough cases that it became a systematic problem. And only 8 to 22% of the bishops or the people being surveyed were confident in their entire system's ability to help people grow an understanding of what they mean by their attractions. They shouldn't have to understand that, because all you have to do is make sure your men have natural inclinations and then understand their vocation, and that they are essentially offering those inclinations, that natural desire to be, shall we say, to be fathers, on the altar to God with their vocation. And then only 4 to 22% were confident in the seminary's ability to soundly manage the seminarian's unhealthy or addictive behaviors. What unhealthy behavior? They mean like maybe they like to hit the bottle a little much. Maybe they they play video games a little much, something like that. Is that what they mean? I'm hoping that's what they mean here. But even then, if it's only 4 to 22%, then you've got a gigantic problem in the system, because these things are all linked. Manage past unethical behaviors, including dishonesty and financial mismanagement. Now, what they mean by dishonesty, we don't know, but like financial mismanagement, you let somebody like that in the seminary? That's interesting. Why would you let somebody with a, maybe, they were, 12, they got caught shoplifting. Okay, whatever. That's a lot of people who become very productive members of society and good people make that mistake when they're a kid. But like something worse, you're letting them into the seminary? I don't know. I'm curious what you think of all this. An interesting comment here. My read says, I know a priest recently retired who said he had to run away, close his eyes all through seminary if he wanted to get out and be ordained. Yes, you're referring to what some people call pink palaces, I think. The name implies what they are. A lot of seminaries are basically taken over by James Martin types, and nobody was living their vows, we'll say, in those places. There had been an effort by Benedict to clean those up. I've been periodically in touch with a priest who watches the show, who tells me that he has a lot of experience trying to handle that issue in his diocese and paid the price for it, because he was actually Catholic, and the others were big on synodal encounters. Now, I'm curious what you have to say about this, so let me know in the comments. Please pray for the seminarians. They desperately will need them. And please pray that these scandals that we've been covering the last few days involving men unfit to receive honors by bishops, that they repent, and the bishops who are trying to do this also repent. Your prayers are appreciated. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.